Hi, this is Brother Murdoch, and today we're going to talk about product testing. So in the reading, we discussed that a code base is not necessarily a product. What makes a code base a product? What's the difference between a code base and a product? Well, the difference between a code base and a product, or a bunch of code and a product, is the fact that you are selling the code. It's available to be purchased, and people can buy it. That turns your code into a product. There are steps in making your code into a product that can be sold, and once you sell the product and make it available, the code needs to change to meet the needs of your customers. So the goal that we have is to be in a market, and so we are selling the code as a product, and we call that market testing. And when you market test, you're seeing who will buy the product, and so based on people's willingness to buy the product, you decide you need to either change it or keep going in a certain direction. So let's say, for example, that we put out a product that has multiple colors, and the consumers are buying more of a certain color. Then maybe we want to hone in on, do we have shades of that color that haven't been sold yet that could be potentially more popular than the current color options? Well, before we can even do that, we have to have something for sale, and there are steps to get to that point. So the first thing we need to work on is the actual code. And so code is made up of modules or units, and those units need to work. If they don't work, then when people purchase the product, they will give it bad reviews, which will lead to it not selling and failing in the market testing. So we first need to have our individual units working. Well, what is a unit? Let's look at that. So I have an app that I'm developing, and here's what the app looks like. Each of these tiles leads to another module in code or another component, and each of those is considered a unit. When I click on this step counter menu, I have a counter that counts my steps, and even inside of this module there are smaller units. So I have a button, but even when I click that button is doing more than just one thing. So if I look at my view here, I have a stop start button that calls a function. So I have two functions that are called depending if I'm stopping or starting, and when I look at the code there, I see that those functions call other functions. So when I call the subscribe function, I see that when data is coming from the phone, I am calling a function called tally latest steps. And I actually had an issue with this exact code where I was trying to test it, and I was doing manual testing, which means I didn't write code to do it. I was just trying out the app and seeing if it worked. And what I was finding is that the number of steps that I was taking wasn't matching the number of steps that were showing up on the app. This happened so many times that I decided to automate the testing. And so I wrote a test that calls the tally latest steps function for me. And so inside of this test, I'm importing that code and that unit, which is separated now from the rest of the code. And so when I run this program, it actually does the testing for me. And that means I can speed up the testing a lot, because before it took me about 3 minutes every time I wanted to count 60 steps. Now it takes me less than 5 seconds to run the same tests. So that's known as a unit test. And I'm going to show you a very simple unit test. So in my project here, I have a folder called Winter 2022, and I made a subfolder called Test. To do that, you right click and say New Folder, and then you just name it Test, like that. Mine already exists, so there it is. Then I wanted to make a specific test file, so I right clicked into New File, and I called mine Step Calculator Test. Let's have you name one Hello World.test.js. Now I've already got one, so here it is. And let's make another folder called utils. So we're going to right click our main folder and say utils for utilities. That means code that will help us do things. And so I've got a folder called that, and I'm going to right click and say New File and make one called Hello World.mjs. That means it's a module of JavaScript which can be used by multiple other programs. And I've already got one, so here it is. And this is going to be a very simple program that returns the word hello. So I'm making a function a constant, because functions don't change usually, and I'm naming that function say hello, and then I'm assigning that function to this arrow function, which means I accept a parameter in parentheses, or I accept no parameters, in my case none. Then I execute it, and so I have an equals and a greater than, which is my arrow. And so with this parameter, I am going to do this. You might have had this in chemistry, where you have an arrow that shows what happens with the inputs, and then this is what happens with our inputs, in our case, whatever's inside the curly braces. So regardless of the input, we don't really accept parameters. We are always going to return hello. And now I have that function called hello. I need to export it so other programs can use it. So I'm going to write the word export default say hello, and that is going to make this function available to other programs. So now I'm going to modify my hello world test script, and in here I need to now import the code that I just wrote. So I'm going to write import say hello from ... which means go up a folder from where I am, and then I'm going to go into the utils folder. So ... utils / and the name of the thing I'm importing, which is hello world.mjs. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import assert from assert, which is a library. In order for that to work, I need to type this command in the terminal. So I'm going to open the terminal. So I'm going to right click and say open in integrated terminal, and I'm going to say npm install mocha -- save. And mocha is the testing library that has this assert module. So once I do that, then assert becomes available for me to use. The way these work is a little different than most scripts. I have these built-in functions now. It's a built-in function, in this case called it, and you'll notice I didn't import it, but the reason this works, and it would not normally work if I was just using plain JavaScript, the reason it works is I'm going to execute mocha, which means I am actually not running Node directly. So you'll see that if I go to my package JSON file, and if you don't have one of those, you need to run through this little tutorial, or this little command called npm init, and it just asks you some questions, and by the end you end up with this package JSON file. And if you don't have in here mocha, you should add it by just repeating the command that we did before. and that's going to be npm install mocha -- save, which will add it to your dependencies. So coming back to this test, we are going to say it, and because in our package JSON file we're running mocha, so we have a script section, we're going to add that here. So you'll notice dependencies should be here, and I'm going to add a comma, and then I'm going to add scripts, colon, curly braces, and then I'm adding a script called test, and it actually runs a library called mocha, and mocha is going to look for certain functions like it. And in my case I also have this type module, which is not necessary, so I'm going to just delete that, and I'm coming back here to my hello world test. So when we run mocha, it's going to look at the code in this test folder. If your folder is not called test exactly, it will not find your tests. And then your tests need to start with something, have .test.js in the end. So this it function starts by describing what we're doing. So the first thing it accepts is a string describing the test. I'm just going to say tests the hello world program. The second parameter is another arrow function. So we have two parentheses, an equals and a greater than symbol, and then we show what the thing's going to do in curly braces. So here we're going to assign another constant called hello, and we're going to set it equal to what returns from say hello. We remember that that is supposed to just return the word hello. So if I come back here, we see that it just returns hello. So that should be what we're looking at. So we're going to test that in code, and then we don't have to look at it with our eyes, or a human doesn't even have to look at it. This test could run completely by itself, just a computer running a server whenever it wants to check if our code is functioning correctly. This is called an automated unit test. So here we type the function assert equal, no s, and then in parentheses we pass two values: the parameter we're checking and then what we expect it to be equal to. So we're passing the hello variable that we got back from the say hello, and then we're passing a constant that we expect it to equal to. And now I'm going to run the command npm run test, and this should run my tests. So you will notice that it did not like the fact that I took out my mod type equals module. So we are going to fix that. So let's go back to package JSON, and we are going to add back this comma here, type and colon module. And we're going to do npm install. That should update our libraries and our JavaScripts. I'm going to say npm run test again, and here we have two tests running. I'm running my hello world test, and it was passed. You see a green check mark for hello world and one passed. Now you'll notice that I have more than one test. This is typical of a project. You want to test most of your code, so you should have a lot of these tests, and when you run you want to see which ones didn't work. So you'll notice that the code is saying my step test did not pass, my step calculator. It was expecting 60 steps and it only got 49. So I still have work to do on that one. And so let's go back to our diagram. So when our unit tests are finished, see, I don't have a passing test for my steps, but when I do, I am then going to move on to something called integration testing, which means I'm testing it with the app. So I'm testing the whole app all together and seeing if all the units work correctly together. Once I'm passing the integration testing, I can then send my app to the App Store and start product testing with actual customers and see what they think of my product. And that is the flow that we have from unit testing to integration testing to market testing, which is when we actually make money in theory.